First of all, welcome everybody to our Securing Municipalities session this morning. As we've talked about, it's about privacy and cybersecurity strategies for our municipalities across Canada. And we've tried very hard to bring in some very interesting speakers this morning that can talk directly to some of the struggles and challenges that we know the municipalities across Canada are facing around cybersecurity, whilst also being able to manage your budgets, look after your constituents, and of course, keep your operations running. So we'll be having some good conversations around 3 different topics today. But first, I just wanted to introduce Charter and our partners as we begin the conversation. So first of all, Charter is a computer reseller, a value-added reseller, network value-added reseller who's been working across Canada for almost 30 years. We're Canadian-owned and run from Victoria in BC, but we have nationwide coverage. As I mentioned, we've been running for almost 30 years. We have over 160 employees, and of that, more than 50 of them are engineers. So we have been very, very well experienced in delivering strong technical solutions to our customers. I'm very proud to have joined Charter 4 years ago, and since that time, I've been able to see our customers giving us great feedback on our ability to support and help them through their business issues. And that's very much our focus as a company, is not just to sell product, but to help customers consume and use it, and also to deal with the challenges of operationalizing that. And to make that happen, we work with a number of different partners, both product and services solutions that allow us to deliver needs of our customers. So today we're going to be talking about a couple of different ones of those, which includes Arctic Wolf, and I'll introduce the team here in a couple of seconds. But what we did want you to know is that we are looking at offering a $150 donation to the Canadian Cancer Society for any customers who reach out to us and want to have a conversation around the content that you've seen today. And so if we can get on a meeting with ourselves and Arctic Wolf, where we can talk about how we can begin to drive you down a path of better security and content, we'll make that donation to the Canadian Cancer Society, and that comes from Arctic Wolf. So the thing that has inspired this conversation is that we know that technology is critical to where most of our customers across multiple different technologies want to go today. Whether it's providing visibility or just enabling your users to do what they need to do, whatever it takes, technology is a great asset in running your business. However, it's also extremely fair to acknowledge that this brings in risk of cybersecurity. And that's a confusing challenge to approach. As you look at all the different technologies across your stack, of all the different things you need that might be in the field, it might be in your offices, it might be in your various locations that you provide to your constituents, you need to protect those environments. And we all know there is a cost to inaction. And we consistently see in the news the bad news about threats and risks that every organization faces. But we've seen that public organizations are often targeted, primarily because of their visibility and your importance to your constituents, but also it is a much more constrained budget that you're operating on than some higher technology-oriented companies who spend a lot more money on these kind of capabilities. So how do we best address these challenges? What we tend to do is we try to keep things simple, and we try to do things the same way we've always done them and try to put our little protections around those various instances. But that's not allowing you to take advantage of these new capabilities. It's not making you comfortable to step into new areas of technology because it seems to therefore incur risk. But I would suggest that there is a better way. I would suggest that technology married with cybersecurity should allow you to offer new services to your constituents, to be more responsive to their needs, to reduce your operating costs, and to give you better visibility into all of your operational environment. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how we can achieve those objectives and offer a much better response. For Charter, we've been working in the security space for many, many years. And one of the things we're very, very strong in our belief in is that architecturally approaching the problem is better than putting band-aids on. And so we talk about this idea of frameworks, and there are many that are used, and we can work with any that customers want to work with, but the one we often default to when customers are saying, how do I do this, is the NIST framework. And what they have provided is a very strong foundation and structure for working through the problems. And the heart and soul of that is knowing what your policy and your governance is, setting the rules and boundaries that you want to work to, because from there, we can begin to build the protections you want. From then on, we move out to this concept of identify, knowing what you've got and what you need to protect. This allows you to then build rules and protections around those entities. Once you've got your environment protected, we then need to look for those who are trying to make our day bad. We need to detect threats as they begin to build up and respond to those threats in very short amounts of time. And that's one of the reasons that Charter ourselves work with Arctic Wolf to help us achieve that process. And then should the worst occur, we need to be able to recover. And we'll talk about incident response in those worst days as well as we go through the session today. And that's why we're working with these partners, because all of this, from the governance all the way through to recovery of your worst day, needs design, needs architecture, and needs planning. And so, to introduce our speakers who are going to talk about that today, we have three different speakers. Josh Topnik is from Arctic Wolf. He has extensive experience in delivering technology solutions and helping their customers enhance their cyber risk and security position. Tim McCreight is the CEO and founder of TaleCraft Security, with over 40 years experience, and has had roles in many important companies like CGA, Canadian Pacific Railway, and the government of Alberta. And finally, Michelle Dennedy, and certainly not last. Michelle has been a very, very influential person in cybersecurity, worked for many different companies, very large companies, including Cisco when I was there. She currently is the Chief Data Strategy Officer for Abaxx Technology, but has histories at Cisco, McAfee, Sun Microsystems, and she's been involved in IEEE standards writing as well. Between the three of them, I think they're going to bring some really interesting topics today. Myself, my name's Ronnie Scott. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Charter, and we as Charter would love to be able to follow up on any of the topics that come up today. A couple of housekeeping things before we get on. You are able to unmute yourself, but we would ask keep yourself on mute throughout the session. If you have a question, we would ask that you put it in the chat session for this WebEx. If we can get to it, we will. If not, we will follow up and make sure the answers get back to us. And at the end of the session, if we have time, we might be able to open the floor to some open questions. And that is kind of the show. So I'm going to hand over now to Tim McCreight, who's going to lead us out for the first part of this seminar.
Great. Thanks so much, Ronnie. Let me make sure I get this correctly before I carry on. I think everyone can see my screen, and let me start the slideshow.
Perfect.
Wonderful. Awesome. Microsoft Work. Thank you. This is perfect. So, thanks, everyone. And good morning. My name is Tim McCreight. I'm the CEO and founder of TaleCraft Security. This is, my wife had to remind me, this is year 44 now in security for me. So I started in 1981 when I got out of the Royal Canadian Air Force in the reserves and had an opportunity to pay off a mess bill that I still owed. So I needed a job desperately. I took a role in a hotel in downtown Winnipeg, Manitoba, and I've been working in the security world ever since. I've had the honor of spending time both in physical security and cybersecurity. And today, what I want to talk about is cybersecurity in our Canadian municipalities, but looking at it from a risk-based approach. Let's make sure this works. So I just have a quick agenda for my part. And this is my girl Piper. So she is my office mate and keeps me in line, make sure I follow my schedule every day. More importantly, make sure I take her out for lunch when it comes time. So she keeps me on the straight and narrow, and she's actually here with me today. So a couple of things. First, I want a little bit about me, a little bit of my background, and some of the work I've done within the public sector here in Canada. I want to talk about the cybersecurity challenges that we face in municipalities. These are some of the threats and the risks that I faced at the City of Calgary. I also want to focus on this risk-based approach and how you as a municipality can actually incorporate this concept of looking at risks facing your enterprise and how can you manage it from a business perspective and ensuring that you focus on selecting really amazing partners to address your requirements. And hello back.
You are receiving
Welcome.
this call from Amazon customer service. We have seen recent.
Oh, that you may want to go on mute. That's going to be a while if you're on hold with Amazon. So I'll just carry on. I want to talk about enterprise security risk management, something I've been very passionate about for the last 15 to 20 years, and how you can incorporate it, because I've done successfully just that approach within the government of Alberta, the Auditor General's office here in Alberta, as well as the City of Calgary. Finally, what it means by building relationships within your organization, within your municipality, and what you should look for when you want to work with partners and with trusted industry professionals across Canada. Some key takeaways and some next steps as well. All right, so, and my apologies, folks, you're going to see lots of dog pictures because really that's all I got left. I'm too cheap to buy stuff off of, Shutterstock, so I'm just using pictures of my dogs. But let's move on. I'll leave this up here for just a couple of seconds. So this way I can say what the hell, right, throughout the rest of the presentation. And you don't know if I'm wearing pants or not, really. That's what we're at here for this morning. So I'll leave it at that. And I'm not going to stand up just to prove the point. So a little bit about me. Let's go through this really quickly. I was the Chief Security Officer for the City of Calgary. So I was responsible for all of the security for the facilities, as well as the cyber profile and the operational technology programs in the City of Calgary. We're 1.5 million people, 140 different buildings, 15,800 employees, municipal staff that also included all of our councillors, the mayor running executive protection, right through to our payment card operations on the transit platforms in Calgary. I was responsible for all of that. And the best part was, it was during the pandemic. I'll let that sit there for a second. Next, I had spent time as the Chief Information Security Officer for the Government of Alberta. So I started that role when there were no CISOs across the provinces or in the federal government. And it was an honor to stand up and run that program for almost 7 full years. So that's more than double the lifetime of most CISOs in North America. It's hard to stay for that long. And that's why I have gray hair now, folks. It was actually brown before, but it's gray now. And finally, I was a principal of audits at the Office of the Auditor General of Alberta. So my role at the Office of the Auditor General was not as a financial auditor, but as a value for money systems auditor. And I didn't have an economic background, but the Auditor General got a hold of me and asked if I would take a look at the Government of Alberta's security program. So in effect, I actually created my own job posting at the bullet point above. So the audit that I created for the OAG pointed out 11 numbered recommendations that were read into the Legislative Assembly, which meant that they were serious enough that they required a 3-year program. And I was offered the job after I did the audit to come and fix the mistakes I found. Funny thing, after you do an audit, you don't actually see all of them until you come behind the scenes and ask the real questions. Then that's when the real fun starts. I'm a husband, a son, a brother, a human to Hazel and Piper. Those are my 2 dogs. The one on the left is Hazel. She's a 120-pound bull mastiff, so she weighs more than my wife. And watching them both walk down the street in winter is it's funny on its own. So it's been fun to watch them. But this is a typical Saturday for us with the dogs. And finally, an ESRM evangelist. Absolutely. I've been teaching this in courses across the globe for the last 15 years. And for you folks here on the webinar, this process works. It takes time and commitment, but it works. And we're going to get into that here shortly. Let's take a look at some of the challenges that I faced in my municipal space with here in Calgary, but also when I was at the province of Alberta. First up, this increasing frequency and the sophistication of the cyber attacks. I know Josh is going to talk a little bit about that as well moving forward, but you can imagine what we faced 15 years ago is so different from what we're facing today. The speed and the increase of technology, the ability for our adversaries to adapt technology far faster than we can, and some of the things that we had to deal with as well, which included all of these legacy systems and budget constraints. I don't know if I can see a show of hands, but is anybody in the audience got way more money than they need for cybersecurity? I'll just wait for a second. You guys go ahead. Yeah, I didn't think so. Neither did I. And that was the problem, right? We have never received the funding that we so desperately desire. It's because we haven't made the business case to demonstrate the risks that are facing the enterprise, and more importantly, the value that security can bring if we can help you reduce the risks. And some of the legacy systems, it is so difficult to get rid of them. An example I have is at the province of Alberta, I was still working with Windows NT devices to protect the dams in northern Alberta. Yeah, that was fun. That was a fun audit finding to work with. But you can imagine, not only in our city here in Calgary, but in cities across Canada, we still have legacy systems that we absolutely depend upon. Before you folks got on, we were talking about the use of COBOL still in environments across North America. It's because it still works. So our issue as cybersecurity professionals is how can we look at directing the risk from that and managing it so that we continue to be successful in our enterprise. We have this patchwork of regulations and standards. I know Michelle's going to talk a little bit about privacy and how we're seeing changes globally from a privacy perspective. But these are things that we have yet to get through across the cybersecurity space. Ronnie started our program today talking about the NIST framework. It is an amazing framework for organizations to adopt because it's straightforward and simple to follow. But what it does require you to do, though, is to continue to look at what are the legislative and regulatory requirements you need to address in your specific municipality to address provincial as well as federal legislation and regulatory requirements. So these are things that we all have to deal with. And finally, we cannot do this alone, nor should we. Cybersecurity is a team sport, and it requires all of us to understand that we need to reach outside of the corporate security office and to speak to all of our executives across the enterprise. In the roles that I had both at the provincial and at the municipal level, I made sure that I spent time outside of security, speaking with all of my executives, speaking with my councillors and my mayor when I was at the city, with my assistant deputy ministers, ministers in the premier's office when I was working at the province of Alberta. And it's because we need to understand that we have to be collaborative in our approach in identifying risks and addressing them at an enterprise level. But I also took the time to establish strong relationships within the vendor community and with the security professionals supporting my organization. You desperately need to make sure that you establish those relationships because you cannot rely on all the skills within your environment. And there are some amazing professionals, many of them here right on this webinar today, that can actually help you achieve your goals and objectives from a cybersecurity space. So what does it mean by a risk-based approach? That means a lot to different people, but I look at this from a couple of things. One, you need to focus on what matters most. I want to go back to what Ronnie first started with. When you identify the assets that you need to be in place every day to be successful, that's the first step in adapting a risk-based approach. And my apologies if you hear a bunch of noise upstairs, folks. We're getting our floors replaced, and I asked our contractors, could I just get half an hour? I think they're a little early for lunch, but if I could just bear with me, I'm going to try to get through this quickly as I can. From a risk-based approach, it also means our program has to be adaptive and scalable. As we change and bring in new environments, we bring on programs like artificial intelligence or large language modules. If we change our approach or we remove or reduce our legacy systems and bring on new ones, we have to be able to grow our security program to adapt to those requirements. Also, as we build this risk-based approach, we can take the requirements and the regulations from our legislative and our regulatory aspects and turn it into a regulatory alignment project within the security program. Because what we're doing is we're identifying the risks that are potentially affecting the business, but we're looking at it from that risk lens and that regulatory and that legislative alignment. It is hard work. I'm not going to kid anybody. This takes time and effort. This isn't a point-in-time piece of work, and it is something that's going to be ongoing and iterative. And the question I always get from folks, particularly in the municipal or the provincial spaces, how do you pull this off in the space that we have? And how can I build out a program that's actually going to be reflective of the work that we're doing at a municipal government or a provincial government space? Well, first you have to create this holistic visibility. And it means, again, as a security professional within a municipal government, you need to spend time outside of your office, establishing relationships and looking at what are the risks facing the entire enterprise, the entire municipal government, and how can you reflect those in your security program. So how do we get there? So enterprise security risk management is a strategic approach to identifying and designing and then implementing a security program that reflects the core requirements of the organization, the mission, vision, goals, objectives, and it goes through a series of processes that are iterative, ongoing, and collaborative. So I happen to have a lovely little diagram here I'm going to walk through. In every instance of ESRM, it begins and ends with the business. So I'm going to use the city of Calgary as my example for you folks in the webinar. It began and it ended with the mayor's office, with council and the executives. That was my business. Those were the team members that structured the mission, vision, goals, and objectives for the city of Calgary. More importantly, they're the ones who set the tone, that collective tone across the enterprise to understand how security could generate value to that enterprise. One of the first things you have to do as a security professional is let's understand what are the assets that are in place. And that means that you'll spend time outside of the security office working with each one of the departments across the municipal government to understand what do you need to have in place every day to be successful. Those are the assets that we have to document. They could be people, process, technology, policies, governance, etc. But these are the things that that municipal government needs to have in place up and running every day for it to provide the services to the citizens. Terrific. Once we understand what are the assets, our goal then is to understand what are the risks that are potentially impacting those assets. From a cybersecurity perspective, we spent an awful lot of time doing what-if scenarios with all of the departments across the city to understand what would be the impact if a cybersecurity event occurred. And then more importantly, if we understood what the risks were, we then worked together in those same teams to come up with the next part, which is what's the mitigation strategy that I can put into place to reduce the risks? Remember, we talked about early in the webinar this concept of budget constraints and what we're facing from a fiscal reality. Absolutely. But this is why it's so important for security professionals when they're walking through this process of a risk-based approach is to reach out to other departments and to professionals outside of the municipal government to ask for their feedback, ask for their assistance, and ask for their guidance and understanding of what are some of the strategies I can put into place to mitigate the risk. To go back to what Ronnie first started talking about when we're looking at the NIST framework, what are the controls now that I'm going to put into place to mitigate the risk? And then once I have those controls in place, after they've been accepted by the business, I go into the center part of our diagram, which is the three places that the security team owns and runs every day: incident response, continuous improvement, and the postmortem reviews. And this is kind of a lead into what we're going to talk about later on in this webinar. But this idea that the security team has to be responsible for incident response. We need to understand what are we going to do in the event that, to Ronnie's point, you're having your worst day ever. And how can the security team help identify what those risks are? Can I detect if something occurs? Can I contain it? Can I eradicate it? And can I recover back to normal? That's where we come to the continuous improvement. What are the steps that I can take throughout my day as a security professional to continually assess the efficacy of my controls and ensure that the controls are operating well? And if I'm working with a partner, how can the partner help me to make sure that those controls are operating effectively every day? And then the last, which is important, is this understanding what happens after an incident. It's just as important as how we manage the incident. Postmortem reviews are something that the security team has to manage and understand and learn from as well. It's an opportunity for us to take a look at what did we do well, what can we work on, and more importantly, how can I change my approach, adopt those new procedures, and put them into place as quickly as I possibly can. The last part of a risk-based approach is creating the foundation for the security program. And that ranges everything from the policies and procedures that we have right up through to who's going to sit on something as what I had built in the city of Calgary, as well as the government of Alberta, which was a security steering committee. It was an opportunity to engage all departments from across the municipal government and the provincial government to sit in and understand what the security program was. And what I did is I created it so that security was just one vote at the table. But it meant that the other departments had a say in what the security department was going to focus on. And more importantly, to enable the success of the municipal government by creating this program, bringing representation, and then bringing what we had decided to mitigate the risks back to executive and to council for their review and their acceptance, or their review and the opportunity to try another avenue to reduce the risks. But this, folks, is what I call my simplified ESRM diagram. And it's an opportunity for us to understand that in a risk-based approach, everything begins and ends with the enterprise. And it means as professionals, we need to spend time understanding what are those mission, vision, goals, and objectives. What do I need in place every day to be successful? What could possibly go wrong against those assets? And what do I have as a mitigation strategy to reduce the risks? And this is where we get a chance to learn more about our interactions with partners and how we can actually draw on the strengths of our partners moving forward if we put a program like this in place. So this is the other dog. So this is Hazel, the big dog. So you can see her head's way bigger than mine. So I'm assuming she's far smarter than I am. But I use her often to talk about presentations. And I talk to her about what relationships we can build with some of the vendors that we have. So start with why. And the first question that we should always ask is, I need to look at the skill sets that I have within my organization. And I don't know about you folks, but when I was in the municipal government structure, I had some amazing folks that worked with me. Absolutely. but we knew that we needed specialized expertise to help us with a lot of the different projects that we had underway. That's why coming to folks at Charter and working with Arctic Wolf is a great opportunity for all of you here on this webinar to understand the value of what a partner can bring and that specialized expertise you may not have within your municipal government structure. It's an opportunity to look at cost sharing opportunities so that you don't need to hire a full-time employee for a project. If you have some amazing skill sets at Arctic Wolf or Charter, they can come in, help with you, and reduce some of those risks and take on those projects. I did this often when I was in the municipal government. It's because I knew that I didn't have the capability to hire individuals in, but I had the funding and the budget to bring in specialized skill sets to work through it. It's an opportunity for us too to start sharing threat intelligence. So what we established during the pandemic at the City of Calgary was we started sharing intel with vendors that we had worked with, particularly regarding threats that we were seeing, but also with other municipal governments. And that's something I want to challenge everybody here on the webinar today is, who do you reach out to in the municipal government structure to talk about different threats that facing your city? Do you share that information with other municipalities? Are you part of MISA and other organizations where you can share information back and forth? Because this is a great way for all of you to establish that external relationship with other municipal governments, also with vendors that you trust and you use within your day-to-day. And it creates this broader network. If you do have an incident where you can call upon folks like the team at Arctic Wolf and Charter, if you are in the middle of an incident, that they can come in and help out because you've already built that relationship in advance. And it's an opportunity for you to trigger that relationship and get them in to help you reduce the effect of the incident and to help resolve and get back to normal. Some of the partners you should be considering in when you look at these relationships outside of your municipal government is the provincial and federal agencies. There are a number of them that you can work with throughout your day-to-day that you can receive information and intelligence from, and it'll actually help you identify and resolve some of the issues you may be facing. There are professional associations across Canada and North America that you can become part of. MISA is one of them, but there are other security associations you can join to share information and learn best practices. Absolutely, folks. You need to spend some time and understanding the value that the private sector and the vendor community can bring to your municipal government. Again, I bring up the team at Charter and at Arctic Wolf is these are fantastic resources you can call upon to help you with your program, to help you with projects. And in the event one of those bad days happens, these teams are here to help out as well. And you should be reaching out to other municipal governments and sharing information and building out a network where you can share your concerns, the potential threats and risks, but also some of the positives that you've had throughout your program. During the pandemic, we established a weekly call between 11 municipal governments. We had this great opportunity for us to share the things that we were working on and going through, and more importantly, some of the successes that we were seeing. Those were dark days, folks. None of those things were great to work through, but it was an amazing opportunity for all of us to continually share information, to understand the value of it, and more importantly, to build those relationships outside of our current roles. So if I can leave you with a few things that we can take away from this. So again, I'm going to go with Hazel taking us on a journey. First up, a risk-based approach is truly essential for the work that we do in security. Why? It's because it focuses on the goals and objectives of the enterprise, not from a tactical perspective where I'm simply selecting a control. That may have worked many years ago. It doesn't work anymore. We, as security professionals, need to elevate our position within an organization. And within a municipal government, we need to truly understand that the work that we want to do from a security perspective gives us a unique opportunity to see the entire enterprise and the risks that face us from a cyber perspective. So if we follow a risk-based approach, it means that we're going to rely on our enterprise, which is our council, our mayor, our executive, to inform us of the path ahead based on the mission, vision, goals, and objectives of that municipal government. I believe, me personally, that ESR and the principles provide the structure that you can use within a municipal government to develop, to implement, and then to maintain a risk-based approach to your cybersecurity program. I have been successful across 11 different organizations when I was the chief information or chief security officer, and those programs are still in place today. And that includes global organizations where I held that title. And the opportunity for me to see it after I left and to see it continue and grow, it really gives me hope that the approach that we're taking with ESRM is truly the path forward. External partnerships and trusted relationships, these are force multipliers. You cannot and you should never try to do this on your own. this is an opportunity for you to reach out to the experts at Charter and at our friends at Arctic Wolf and really focus on how can these teams help you continue with the success that you've already achieved and to build further on that by the relationships that you've established in that vendor community. And I think at this point, I'm complete. So Piper says goodbye. I'm going to let the screen appear, and I will let our next amazing speaker take it from here. Thanks so much, folks.
Thanks, Tim. That was really interesting, and appreciate the time that you gave there. Just a quick note here, we are recording this session, so if anyone wants to be private, please keep your camera off and you can change your name or whatever. Sorry, I should have mentioned this earlier. And feel free to chat in the chat session rather than raise a question. Now, I did see somebody raise their hand. I don't know if I can see who that was. If you are wanting to ask a question, now would be a good time to just pop in. If you can unmute yourself. Okay, I assume it's gone. That's good. Okay, well, thanks again, Tim. What I'm going to do now is hand over to Michelle. If you want to bring your presentation up now, Michelle. And
thank you so much. And I hoped to key off of Tim's content, and I think that we're going to mesh rather well today. I actually am a two-headed beast. My company, Privacy Code, was acquired last summer by a Toronto-based firm called Abaxx Technologies. We are a clearinghouse and closing firm, exchange fund for transition metals, LNG, battery metals, gold, and such. And so they have swallowed the Privacy Code whole. And my other hat, and where I'm going to kind of come from today, I also have a strategic consulting firm called Provatus. And so we're going to talk a little bit more programmatically. And I really wanted to go sort of into the guts of things, where the rubber meets the road, into procurement itself. So we're going to focus quite a bit on that. Dawn, go ahead, next slide. There we go. So what is privacy? Judges, gossip, philosophy, something not real, right? Wrong. Next slide. See, I don't have too many builds. It's none of those things. So next slide. So what is, and we're going to focus on data privacy today. Data privacy is the authorized, fair, and legitimate processing of personal information. And that definition is fairly static worldwide. It will wiggle in terms of what is fair, what is legitimate, and what is personal information globally. But if you look at this context, what you don't see here is lockdown secrecy. What you don't see is sensitive versus insensitive, those kinds of things. Keeping a focus on what is your business objective, what are we doing with data, what do we have the right to have, what are we authorized to have, and remembering that authorization, fairness, and legitimacy is very much time-bound. Next slide. So what is privacy engineering? Now that we've locked down privacy, next slide. So privacy engineering, we define as a discrete discipline. It is very much intermingled, intermeshed with governance and security, but we really use engineering principles and processes to build the controls and measures into the processes, systems, components, products that enable authorized, fair, and legitimate processing of data. So we basically take the tools of how to build stuff with the tools you've got, and we enliven that mission of authorized sharing in context. Next slide. So where does it happen? It happens at the UX. It happens throughout everything that your citizen, your employee, any constituent, any human sees. It can also happen where we're talking machine to machine, where we have groups of training sets, for example, that contain personal data. It can happen through your system's architecture. But the real hero of the day, especially today, are friends in procurement. Next slide. I like to really take the sort of least sexy thing and kind of zhuzh it up to understand how powerful and important. I should say my background, last century, I studied as an attorney. I was a patent litigator before I got into privacy. I got into privacy when I still was in the legal group at Sun Microsystems. And I worked for a fellow you may have heard of called Scott McNeely. And he said, the words of the century last in the 19th century, you have zero privacy, get over it. So whenever I hear from people today that say, A, privacy is dead, or B, I just can't get budget, I say to them, do you think that Scott ran into my office and embraced me and threw dollars at me? No, my friends, no, he did not. And I actually have an email from him saying, when I put a business plan together, I said, this is what we sell. This is who we are. This is what our brand is. Sun is a privacy enabling technology company. Our brand is openness, is sharing, is interoperability. We are a privacy company, sir. And then I slapped down my little business case on his desk. And about 6 months later, he sent me an email and he said, here's some rope to hang yourself with, kid. You're the first chief privacy officer of Sun Microsystems. And at that time, there were only 5 of us in the world because we made the title up. So I go into that history because we are at a crux in the world today where people are again saying, like they did in the 1900s, that privacy is dead because we have large compute, because we have algorithms, because quantum computing is on the horizon. And I will say to you, with love in my heart, that is very 19th century. I would say, get over that notion, and let's get on with things. That said, you still got to talk to gals like me. I'm sort of a reformed lawyer, but we do have our utilities. Where do we have our utilities? We do help set a framework of what are the guardrails, what are the rules, what are the commonalities for data sharing. And there's always a layer cake. In Canada, of course, you have your privacy laws, but you also have discrete provincial laws. And then layered on top of that, just to keep it fun and interesting, we've got a whole set of AI-specific regulations coming on the scene. We'll see what happens in your parliament. It's a little bit calmer than mine, so that's a plus. But I still would look at all of those rules and regulations as data, best case, best handling, best transparency rules. So that you do have this complexity. The good news is we do have machine learning now. So you actually can consolidate some of these requirements and put them through the very things that we're protecting our companies against to make it easier for you. Next slide. I don't really need to say this, but I'll put it in there because I wanted the writing to be there if you want the slide deck later. There are, of course, jurisdictional variations across Canada, various flavors with the various cultures going from, our Quebecois all the way through British Columbia. So you're sort of like our California friends in British Columbia and our more stringent and strict and traditional world over in Quebec. Next slide. So with all this variation, with all of the kind of seemingly loud cacophony of requirements, what is the real impact of quote unquote compliance for government? I put it in air quotes because you're never compliant. Nope, never happened. Maybe for 1 second sometimes for some data, but it's a continuum. So this is really, how do we take that risk-based approach that Tim's talking about, and we get into as much documented and transparent compliance that fits as many of the rules as possible at any given time for every given constituent. What is the impact of all of this? Well, there's increased costs for doing things right. Privacy compliant, ethically developed AI solutions are higher quality solutions. They can cost more. What is the benefit of getting a privacy compliant, ethically developed solution? You don't have to rip it out in the middle of the night when you find that it's got something in there that is a liability tornado. You don't have to necessarily explain, why did you buy that cheap thing? Even to the same people who are celebrating the lowest cost procured item at the time. So remember, thinking about this as an architecture, as support for the business objectives, always keeping in mind the person that is described by these data systems will really help you sort of stay on track with a cost analysis and a business case that supports higher quality, secure, private, and ethical solutions. It can take an extended procurement timeline. This is one of my favorite metrics. If you've got a program that you want to either extend or begin, I love looking at from the time someone had an idea to the time they're able to actually configure a tool or start a process. that's a great metric for you, because as you work on showing your privacy and security engineered processes, as you systematize what are your hard red lines of won't do and must do, you can start to shrink that time to close on procurement. And that's a great metric to know that you're starting to systematically have some consistency across your enterprise. So don't forget about a metric. If something's really messy, that's great, because next year you're going to have a great improvement percentage on that number. Your resource allocation has to shift. You have to dedicate more resources to being a little pickier about what are your data sources. You can't just turn something on and do a .ca and hope that everything's okay, even though that's a lovely little poem. You have to really think about what are those data sources? Are they still fresh? This is almost like food supply. How tainted is that data source if you're depending on algorithms that are very disenfranchised from the original data sources? What is your quality? What is your surety? How important is this to get ish, like the weather? If I get it wrong, I get a little wet. Or is this ish my clinical assay for a new cancer drug? Probably pretty bad to get that wrong. So understanding the context, understanding the quality, understanding the risk allocation allows you to really help and groom those reputation and legal challenges into controllable risk. Next slide. I'm like looking at my clock, 7 more minutes. Woo. Okay, so things to consider. I'm going to do a thunder run through this stuff. A, so I won't bore you, and B, because you have the slides. Things to consider, and I'll kind of go through these, tick these off one by one. Vendor assessment processes, procurement documentation that might change for you, budget considerations, and liability management. Next slide. So setting the table. I didn't have a cute dog to take a picture of. So for your vendor assessment requirements, you're going to have to do a little bit change due diligence on the vendor privacy practices. I see a lot of folks waving a SOC 2 at you and thinking, oh, this is a privacy document. No, it's not. I see people saying we are GDPR compliant. That to me is like a giant red flag, and not one with a maple leaf on it, a bad red flag that says, whoa, there is no such thing as GDPR compliant. What is this vendor trying to signal to me? How mature is their process really? So taking those signals and saying, what are your processes? What are your frameworks? Understanding that they have an ethics framework. It's not something that you talk about at a cocktail party. It's understanding, are you looking at everything as a risk? That's my ethic. Are you looking at everything as a partner? That's my ethic. Those are different ways of controlling risk. So what are our ethics here? What are our hard lines here? What are our controls? So that we're looking and thinking about this as enabling authorized sharing of data that is legitimate. Evaluating previous compliance history. Don't be afraid to ask a company that's been hit hard. Some of those companies are the most incompliant because they have budget. Some of them are repeat offenders. Use that as a signal and adjust price accordingly. Evaluating the technical validation of privacy by design claims. So this is where you're going to have that partnership that Tim's talking about. This is where you might need some of this expertise around this community here. A lot of teams will lack, I won't say many teams. I'm going to update this slide on the spot. Every team will lack specialized expertise in some of these areas. This will definitely take a team area, especially as we get more and more different types and evolutions around machine learning. Next slide. There'll be some changes to your RFP and your contracting process. So understanding that there may be different and changed privacy compliance clauses, what you expect, timeframes for notification, understanding what kind of documentation you're demanding. Remember, we've all got these groovy AI tools, so it's not as hard as it was to go through a lot of heavy documentation to actually interpret it and summarize it. You can expect more from your vendors because they do have these tools. Explainability provisions for automated decision-making. Where is that machine actually providing the background data, the rough draft data, versus making a decision? This automated decision-making is going to be the crux of liability going forward. One of my favorite AI proposals and laws actually came out of the Vatican. You know, I'm a nice Roman Catholic girl by training. Really straightforward stuff. The Pope says, drafting, summarizing, Doing first cuts, you may do. Any decision that impacts a human must be made and taken and held into account by a human being. I think that's a really good first starting hard line. Where in the process of decision making to actually resolution of a business process are you looking at the human in the loop? Really good kind of test for you, especially if you don't have these kind of firm ethical mandates. Understanding breach notification procedures. This is where these local things are gotchas. Sometimes the timing requirements are different. The reporting things are different. This is where you're going to need that team effort. And then data processing limitations, audit rights. We're going to have another battle as it well. I mean, this is where SOC 2 like kind of came out and came into the sunshine, right? Like, I'm going to give you my SOC 2 instead of having an audit. And there were like maybe 2 auditors that ever showed up on my door when I was at Big Co. Do you have the wherewithal to audit if you're going to spend 6 months arguing with someone else's procurement team about audit rights? Figure out what you can do, figure out what is sufficient, and figure out what will give you the information to make the decisions that you need to do to control your risk. And then I'll put ownership in air quotes. If this was a purely legal audience, you would be throwing garbage at me and you'd be fair to do so. Ownership is a tricky legal thing. I won't geek out on it for you, but understanding who is the fiduciary. That's the way to think about it. Who's got hands on? You don't lose your obligation because you don't own it. I own my story to my human history and data. However, we are sharing it together today. So we're all sort of joint fiduciaries in this moment. Once we have contacts and we communicate with one another, that relationship changed. Authorized, processing, personal data, legitimate, and contextual. The risk is inadequate contract terms can create significant municipal liability. So you do want to watch this space. You don't want to be too strict and sort of religious about your terms, but really do continue to sort of take a view and do they still support the risk appetite of the organization? Next slide. Budget. I tried to do a loonie. I don't know if this looks like a loonie, but it's as close as I could come. Increased cost, 15 to 30% premium for privacy compliant AI solutions. So going for those premium things under the desk can cause a lot of risk. Going for enterprise licenses, going for super licenses that control training sets, that don't slurp up your drives, that don't give entitlement for some third-party vendor to sell off all of your brand risk and all of your citizen data. You're going to have to think about what is that total cost of ownership. Extended timelines, the procurement cycle, again, this is what I was saying. If you don't have this already in play, it's actually one of my favorite numbers. When I first sat down, McAfee Intel had just combined. It was kind of like Hugh Hefner just married an 18-year-old. Everyone was naked. It was very awkward. My job was to sort of marry that consumer business from McAfee to Intel's, we are engineers. We are, the saints of Silicon Valley people. Getting that culture right meant that my procurement schedule was sometimes as much as a year long. So I've got my intrepid sales guy in the door. He's ready to get on the yacht and go to club. And the lawyers have to say no, because we don't really understand what do we need? What's the documentation? How do we say yes to things? And what is our hard no? By going through transparency, working with the engineering teams, working with the architectural teams, having visual show and tell of where the data flows go, and how it supports the business decision, shrunk my timelines from an average of 9 months down to 2 weeks. And then we were able to give a guarantee of an SLA from anywhere from 72 hours review to 2 weeks, as long as these preconditions were met. That's a significant deal. And believe me, if you work with salespeople, they want to get on that yacht. And I want to get them on that yacht. So understanding that procurement cycle, if you've got a mayor you're supporting, they're dealing with ego, they're not getting on the yacht. But that's okay. You got to soothe their egos too. Okay, I've got like 2 seconds left. I did 18 minutes to cheat on myself. These are all pretty self-explanatory. You've got a compliance overhead. You've got to do monitoring. You've got to do audit. There's a lot of great third parties to help you do that. And then factoring out so that there's no hidden costs at the end. The worst you can do is acquire a data-heavy system or a tool, and then after all the hoopla is done and you've purchased the tool, you don't have the wherewithal to do the ongoing audit and prevention of risk. on that tool. So think about this as an architecture and not a magical tool. Next selection, next slide. I'm going to fly through these really quickly because I've overtalked my slides and I don't know where I am in my slides because I'm not grabbing them. We're just going with the risk here. I will repeat until I'm done and I'm just hanging out with Tim's dogs. Collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. You can group together with other municipalities who have done a strict review. We're seeing this in state and local governments all around the world. So you're not alone just because you're in a smaller province. You can look at what are the tools, what are the commonalities, what are the common standards, and really sort of team up and get your economic might sort of piled up together. You can do stage implementations to manage compliance risks. We've got a lot of top pressure from top line people saying, AI the world, fire everyone. Well, that's failing everywhere. That's the one thing I know is going to be a fail. Think about a staged implementation that serves business rules that have that full range of coverage. Can I buy it? Can I control it? Can I configure it? Can I govern it? And can I end it? Is there someone there to pull the plug when it's not working to your criteria? Understanding your privacy design requirements from project inception and privacy engineering that supports that and builds that and monitors that from cradle to grave. Doing sandboxes, doing all of those good nutritional things that we've learned how to do in cybersecurity, incident response, and resilience. And then really thinking about ethics as an operational term. This supports your brand. Break down what your brand means in terms of activity. Is it trust? Is it stability? Is it engineering? Is it fun? All of those sort of brandy cool things can be broken down and considered as your ethics. What are the things that support those brand names? What communicates that brand to your employees and to your constituents? And then standardizing these frameworks and streamlining that evaluation over time and measuring that improvement. You're not just there to keep the bad guys out or to keep things quiet because there's no incidents. You're there to efficiently share information. And that's the exciting part of your job. Next slide. I had to put a red-headed lawyer there for you. Considerations for your execs. The liability can go to the individual in many of these drafts. That's going to get fun. It's going to be sort of like that SOX, somebody's going to go to jail sort of situation. I'm kind of all here for that, even though I'm currently, I was the CEO of my company. I don't want to go to jail, but I think it's really interesting. We're starting to look at what are the actual penalties that are beyond dollars, because the dollars have gotten so large, people aren't even looking anymore. AI system vulnerability management requirements. Understanding that these cute freebie little ChatGPT fun times are over. How are we actually doing checking? How do we understand that our employees have enough tools that they're not doing end runs around us? Understanding what is an incident in the world of AI. How do we understand if I'm just getting constant wrong results? Is that an incident or is that a quality thing? Do we have the response techniques and technologies for that? And the cross-border data restrictions. We are all intertwined, security, privacy, and AI governance. Next slide, I think. At the end. Easy peasy. Everything's changing. We're going to fundamentally change, and some of it's going to be good, and some of it's going to take time. Even the stuff that takes time is your friend, because you're going to have better metrics next year, so don't walk away from it. New approaches have to be made for these systems. AI is not just more big data. AI is not just cloud. I think AI is fundamentally changing the mindset. The technology has been there, especially in geek world in technology. The mindset of our business leaders has changed with AI forever. And I think that's the fundamental procurement approach, to understand that it's not a technology shift necessarily. This is a mind shift. This is a business shift. This is a culture shift. So understanding that that's really going to impact our world. Budget planning, we talked about a little bit. Cross-functional teams are essential, and we have to address as early as possible. Somebody's got a great idea to help children who are Native peoples out in a place where there's no Wi-Fi, and we want to help with their mental health. Exciting. So let's all get our iPhones out and take pictures of these kids, and then we'll send it back to Ottawa, and it'll all be great, right? simmer down. We don't need to get into laws at this point. We don't need to get to ethics or anything. What do you want to do? How do we want to get there? What do we want to serve? How do we want to serve these people? And now let's look at how to do that without creating a liability tornado for everyone. Next slide. Now I think it is the end. I'm going to pass over this one. You'll have it for your viewing pleasure. Next slide. Because I'm like 2 minutes over. That's it. So call us if you need help. Our mission is to equip complex organizations with strategies and tools to build ecosystems that accelerate your growth, enable confident, responsible data use. We don't want to shut you down in privacy land. We want to accelerate the authorized and legitimate and ethical and, dare I say, fun processing. 19th century, privacy's dead, over.
Thanks very much, Michelle, and appreciate the various input. And certainly the AI discussion is one that we are having a lot with our customers at the moment. If there's anything we can do to help with that, we have an AI team. We have a co-pilot team with Microsoft who are specialized in helping our customers adopt AI. And I do agree, it is a process. It's not just a tool you turn on. Making sure that your data is safe, your data is clean, your data is valid is a critical point, but then also making sure that the responses are not hallucinations, that they're not biased, that they're not incorrect in their very form. These are important parts of using AI as a tool set, and we can certainly help with that. If there's any way you want to look at how we can address that, reach out to us and we can work with you. So that brings us to Josh from Arctic Wolf, and I'm very excited to have Josh on the call. We first built a relationship with Arctic Wolf after we had a couple of customers who had the bad day, and we needed to be able to direct them to someone who could get them back on track. And in 2 incident responses, Arctic Wolf proved themselves to be reliable, fast, responsive and helpful, and brought our customers back to an amazing place of restoration from horrible situations. That was enough to grab our attention and say, we need to know more. And as the CTO and CIO at Charter, I chose Arctic Wolf to be our platform for securing our internal infrastructure here at Charter, and I have no regrets. They have been an amazing team, and they provide a great incident response program for organizations without having to invest ridiculous amounts of money. So I do recommend looking into Arctic Wolf. But I'm going to hand over to Josh now, and he's going to talk a little bit about what it looks like to protect your environment and respond to these threats as they evolve.
Thanks, Ronnie. Tim, Michelle, thank you as well for the preamble. That's fantastic. And I think it'll dovetail nicely into my presentation today. So when we look, I've been selling now in the cybersecurity space for about 3.5 years. I've been with infrastructure for much longer. We're not going to give dates. But in this space specifically, there are 2 intertwined problems that we see. One of them is a tools issue. There's just this massive amount of tool sprawl and noise from those tools. The second one is actually a staffing issue. So we actually have a talent shortage in the cybersecurity space. For the Canadian market, that's in the range of 40 to 50,000 positions that aren't getting filled. There's no one there to take them. And so I'm going to start just on the tool front. Now, this is, if you want to think of this as the tool universe, right? The dawn of time for us was anti-malware, right? And anti-malware fit the need at the time, right? We needed that to stop, malicious activity against endpoints. And that was fine, but we needed a way to like block the attackers, right? And so we made a new technology, firewalls, right? Well, that'll keep the attackers out. But then our staff couldn't get in to do their work. So we introduced, virtual private network, new technology, right? Layer that on top. And the VPN was great. It allowed our staff to now authenticate and get through the firewalls and get down to their workstations. But that got compromised, right? Because attackers iterate. And so we're like, well, let's introduce multi-factor technology. Now we, 2-factor authentication to get in. So that makes us a lot more secure, but also introduced a bunch of complexity. So then we introduced access management, right? Information access management. Identity access management. And this is now getting larger, right? And obviously, as we know, we're not adding staff as we do this, right? We're throwing tools at a problem. And so we may not have the appropriately trained staff. So with IAM, we've got a highly complex tool that needs configuration, and mistakes are quite often made. Then we saw this pivot, right? Now we're moving out of our on-prem infrastructure. We're moving up into the cloud. So we introduced web access firewalls. And again, new tech, different configuration settings, mistakes. So then we introduced public key infrastructure. I think you people see where I'm going with this. So what we have is this need to buy a tool to fix a problem, but that's not fixing the issues, right? Because again, attackers continue to iterate as they move forward. To drive that point home, when we look at statistics from last year, there are about 3,200 security vendors in the market today. Last year, we spent $215 billion on tools. And with that, we still had about 5,200 reported breaches in 2024. So again, those are just the reported ones. So we don't have a tool problem. We got more than enough tools. What we have is an effectiveness problem, right? Leveraging those tools properly. Even going back to one of the comments that Michelle made around like, what is the, the ongoing configuration, the ongoing optimization of those tools that you're putting in, or those items you're putting into your environment, right? It applies to this as well. So again, we don't have a tools problem, we have an effectiveness issue. And that's really coming down to kind of the second piece that layers in with that human aspect. So I have this picture of a SOC. I would love to have worked in a place like this. I worked at Great Canadian early in my career. We had a NOC that looked nothing like this, maybe a couple of desks and some screens on the wall with solar winds. It was awesome. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. But I'd love to work in a place like this. The reality, though, when we look at the staffing issues that are on the market today is we have, again, as I mentioned, a lack of available talent. And so what ends up happening is that lack of talent drives higher salaries. And what we've seen, especially in the municipal space, public sector in general, like some of those are unachievable. If we look at just the Vancouver market, the average salary for a cybersecurity specialist in a more senior role is about $150,000 a year. That's just the salary, right? That's not the fully loaded cost of that employee. And so what ends up happening is the position doesn't get filled, and we start to see a delegation of cyber duties, right? Hey, Ronnie, I need you to watch the firewalls. Hey, Michelle, you're going to be responsible for endpoint, right? Tim, I need you on some of the compliance aspects, right? So all these things get pushed around to different members of the team, and then that leads to no strategic focus, right? Everything is reactionary all the time, right? We're just putting out fires. On top of that, it leads to burnout, right? Because we just keep stacking. We go back to that tool diagram that I talked about earlier, right? Again, multiple tools that we're looking at too. It's not just one tool, it's many spread out. So it leads to burnout, which leads to turnover, which drives us back up to the top and having to go back into that market and like, all right, now I need sysadmins, or now I need help desk employees, or now I'm trying to groom somebody up. And again, the nasty part with this is once people get in and they get some experience, they can pivot out. They can go to, who's paying the next highest salary, right? And they're going to advance their salary earnings that way. So again, it's an ugly problem. Now, from an Arctic Wolf perspective, just to kind of stomp down on that a little bit, we've got in our world a couple of distinct teams. We have a security operations center. So this is a multiple around the globe, but these are staff members that they're looking at logging 24/7, 365. They're building out prescriptive remediation. If we see something, we're reaching out to our customers to bring that information to them. In some cases, we can actually take response actions. We can lock out accounts or put block rules on a firewall, move messages inside of Exchange if we think they're malicious. So there are things that we can do here in not only the monitoring aspect, but also in the space of actually taking action and stopping it. Quite often I describe it like having a sink that's leaking. We can reach in underneath the sink, we can turn off that valve, stop the immediate threat, stop the immediate problem, and then come back, as the plumber would, if you will, with a much more detailed instructions and work with, your staff to fix a problem. So that's one aspect of kind of what Arctic Wolf brings to the table in this space. The other one in the light blue on the left-hand side of this slide actually pertains to our concierge security team. So this is that strategic aspect that, again, is missing in a lot of environments, right? Having somebody to help provide some guidance and oversight. Like, what are you trying to do within the organization? Going back to Tim's earlier comment around, it starts and ends with the business, right? What are your goals? What are you trying to achieve? And this team will help shape that direction with regards to the security along the way for that. So, oh, you're transitioning from on-prem Exchange up to Microsoft 365. We can go in and lean in on best practices for that Microsoft 365 configuration, as an example. But this team also acts as just an escalation point. If you have questions, comments, concerns, you can go to this team and ask that. So instead of going to Google to ask the question, you can now get some of these questions asked by somebody who understands cyber. So again, in this way, we are at Arctic Wolf are kind of taking on the ownership of that staffing issue, right? Freeing up really your staff to do the better, more functional things, right? Like checking logs, like that's a tedious, horrible task, right? So let's offload that to somebody who, we have the staff to cycle through it. We don't have the same issues with burnout, right? We can stay sharp. We can do it 24/7, 365, right? Where a lot of shops don't do that. The other thing I wanted to call out, I mentioned, briefly that aspect regarding, best practices for Microsoft 365. As part of our service, we do ongoing security posture reviews. So think of it as proactive hardening of our customer environments. And we've got about 140 of these security posture reviews inside of our library, and that's grown. Again, I've been here for about 3.5 years. When I started, there was about 70 of them. So we've seen some massive growth in that space. But again, this is something that our customers can go into, essentially have a shopping list of areas that they want to look at. And what's neat is these security posture reviews tie back to frameworks, right? They tie back, Ronnie mentioned NIST. We have, we show alignment to NIST 1.1, NIST 2.0, CIS version 8 as examples. Those are common frameworks I bump into all the time. So as you're doing your shopping, you can also see, how this is going to help address maybe one of those frameworks that you're working on, right? To bring up your own security, reduce your security risk within your environment. The other piece from a tooling perspective is at the end of the day, we still need tools, right? We still need tools, but it's about getting all those tools kind of reporting to a single spot, getting that broad visibility. And again, this is an area where Arctic Wolf kind of leans in and brings something a little bit different to the table. So our platform is based in the cloud. We are deployed in AWS Canada Central. So our data is resident within Canada. So again, from a municipal perspective, public sector perspective, this is something we get asked a lot on RFPs, right? Is your data resident in Canada? Yes, it is. Yes, I have a SOC in Waterloo as well. So you're working with Canadian staffers from that perspective. But this is the neat part about what we do in this space is that we let you bring your own tool sets. We're not dictating what tool sets are to be leveraged. So whether you're running SentinelOne or CrowdStrike or Defender for Endpoint or ESET or Web, we don't care. I don't care. Bring it, right? Like we want to bring that information in. On the networking, your firewalls, your wireless access points, send the data to us, right? You got workload on-prem and in the cloud. We have integrations into Azure, GCP, AWS, as you can imagine, and even on the SaaS space, Microsoft 365, right? Google, Box, Salesforce, and a solution called iManage is a document management system that lawyer firms tend to use. So we've got integrations into those tools, identity, things like Active Directory, Entra ID, Okta, Duo, and then we also get some great insights into kind of what your humans are doing at the same time, right? So it's all part of this ingestion because we see this massive surface of telemetry. Interestingly enough, when we bring this information in, we're looking at about 750 billion security observations a day. That's what's hitting our SOCs from a global perspective. So that's the top of funnel, if you will, for us. And out of those 750 billion security observations, once it works its way through our machine learning and our artificial intelligence, it goes to my humans, by the way. We don't just flip it to you. It goes to a human for validation. And after my humans validate, we see about 1 ticket per customer per day. So we take it from 750 billion observations to about 6,700 tickets a day, again, across our security operations centers from a global perspective. So that reduces the noise, right? That's the piece that burns your staff out. That's the piece that causes burnout, is having somebody staring at a screen trying to find out what's real. And again, we're doing it at scale inside of the Arctic Wolf platform. I wanted to share some municipal use cases or case studies that we've had recently here. I've got about 12 municipalities on Arctic Wolf inside of British Columbia today. I don't use names. We don't use names. We're a cybersecurity company. But again, I wanted to kind of showcase what that looks like. So I have a smaller municipality here, about 200 users, 45 servers. They're all on-prem site. There's nothing up in the cloud. They had 6 locations that required us to do some network monitoring at, collect their firewall information from. And again, you can see the diverse tech stack. We have FortiGate, there's some Defender for endpoint, there's Entra, right? So, and again, in the municipal space, I tend to see a pretty heavy lean on the Microsoft side. Not a problem, but again, you don't have to, right? We work with all those different things, all the different tools, apologies. The challenges that we addressed, and again, this was common. I mean, there's a reason that I've got 12 municipalities inside of British Columbia, right? Tend to have small IT teams with nobody that's dedicated or focused on security. Again, I have conversations over and over and over again about just not being able to hire, right? They just don't have the capability. Either there isn't staff there or they can't pay the salaries. This particular customer wanted the consolidation for visibility, right? They, again, a bunch of point tools and had a small team trying to look at them all, right? And the other one was no 24/7, 365. So the ability for us to provide that information, to again step in and take some actions if needed to, was key for this particular customer. Again, in their space, lots of firefighting. So again, there was no focus. So when we spoke about that concierge approach and that proactive and ongoing hardening, that's what got this particular municipality excited. And I got to be honest, that's the thread that flows through all of them too. You'll see that. And then unique to this one, there was also an end user training requirement. So the customer had purchased a tool and just didn't have the time or the want to manage it, right? Actually didn't like the tool at all. And so this one of the other solutions that we have, aside from managed detection and response, we have a managed risk. We also have a managed security awareness training. And so they took advantage of our end user training as well, fully managed, right? So, we make the content, we send it out, we collect the results, we analyze, and then we sit down with our customers on a regular basis and tell them who's struggling. So we took that entire workload off, right? It's against one of those tedious tasks. For my second case study, a much larger municipality, and a full RFP process along with this one. The other one was a sole source, as it indicated at the top. So again, this one closer to 2,000 users, a couple hundred servers. This was another on-prem site, but a large municipality, right? So multiple sites requiring network monitoring. Different tech stack though, right? Palo Alto firewalls, multiple EDRs in place, different authentication platforms, and again, the same standard Microsoft stuff. But again, we have this broader tech stack. We can still support this customer, again, with this agnostic approach that we have. I'm not going to reread that first one, but again, the same challenges, even with this larger municipality, still had the same issues with regards to no one dedicated to cyber, struggling to hire staff. Again, that concierge messaging around ongoing hardening, that was key. What was different for this particular entity was they actually had a SIM, a security incident event management platform. But the cost for that, not only to manage it, but just to send data to it, was very high. And it was unpredictable. If they sent more information in 1 month, the cost would go up. And we have a predictable pricing model with Arctic Wolf, where essentially we identify some key metrics, and that's the price. Whether the data amount goes up or down, it's irrelevant to us. And so for them, this unpredictable pricing was a challenge that they had and something that we addressed with the Arctic Wolf solution. And again, you'll see the end user training, again, quite common, right? We talked about it. We have a tool effectiveness issue, right? I started at the beginning of my presentation, and user training is no different. Okay. So when it comes to the world of procurement, RFX, lessons learned. And I know, okay, you're going to be like, yeah, all right, lessons from a vendor on how to do RFXs. Honestly, some of the more successful ones I've seen have started with a primer, like an RFI primer. So you can get your information out there on interest, right? And identify kind of what options are in the space. The second one is then a targeted RFP launching off of that RFI, right? So what we tend to see is there's less drain on internal staff with this. We had seen in my time here, I've seen a couple of RFPs that didn't have an RFI primer, and they were broad. And what was happening is that IT team was addressing like 30 or 40 fully developed proposals, and having to go through that. It delayed the procurement process by months. To process that, right? So again, that targeted the RFI primer and then targeting an RFP, again, less drain, and again, it's just better in an engagement model, even for the vendors that are participating, right, as opposed to everyone waiting around. The other one was gatekeeping your content. So I know transparency is key, especially in the public sector space, but there are limits to that. You need to be very mindful that information you put out there, even around what I just showed, right? Like those all identify aspects of your environment, what your firewalls are, what endpoints are, right? What mail services you're using, what authentication you're using. Those can be used against you, right? And so again, what we were seeing were some of these non-targeted RFPs being released with just a ton of information in them, and that led to some downstream effects that were negative on those municipalities or in private sector customers as well. So what does good look like, right? I've talked a lot about kind of what's going on in the market, but what does good look like? So, and I'm going to echo a bunch of Tim's comments on this, right? So one is, and Michelle's for that matter too. So on the MDR services side, like you need to be looking for a blend. Humans alone don't have the ability to process the amounts of data that we need. And AI alone doesn't have the intelligence to do it. So what we've seen, and this is outside of just Arctic Wolf, in general, a human and AI or ML blend is kind of the best way to go. It's best of both worlds, right? Use the ML and AI to knock down the noise, get your humans to hone a little further. Focus on companies that remove those tedious tasks. And I poked fun at a couple of things today. Again, I'm not saying something that's specific to Arctic Wolf. This can apply to EDR vendors or end user training vendors across the board, right? Focus on these companies that can remove some of these tasks that burn out your staff, right? What value are you bringing with regards to like time recovery for my people? An agnostic approach. So a vendor should support your past purchases. You've made a decision to go down a path with a particular tool. You should be choosing vendors that support that, right? As opposed to having you do a rip and replace. Secondarily to that, flexibility, right? So if you make a change, because again, maybe that tool isn't working for you anymore. Maybe you're a Microsoft shop today, but you want to pull away from that, right? Is that vendor that you're choosing for your MDR services, are they going to have that flexibility to be able to pivot when you pivot? Last one, and again, this is one of the pieces that Tim was talking about, environment hardening. So vendors should be helping you to stop new incidents from occurring, right? What are you bringing to us to help us stop an incident? Too often, I see something called what I like to call the whack-a-mole, right? So a ticket pops up, vendor knocks it down, and then what? Like, do we go back in? Do we find root cause on that? Do we understand why that happened in the first place? How do we fix it? That's not necessarily always happening, and you need to be mindful of that, because if that same issue pops up again, they'll knock it down, and they're hitting their ticket metrics. Like, oh, we're nailing it. Look at all these tickets we're closing. But are you stopping the root cause of that problem? Why did that happen, right? And then the last point on that environment hardening is this process should be ongoing for the duration of your contract, whatever it is. This isn't the Ron Popeil grill here. It isn't like some kind of set it and forget it deal. Security is a journey. It continues to happen, right? You're moving. It moves with you. Attackers iterate, as per my previous conversation or previous slide. And again, just to drive the point home, you never know who's trolling for data, right? So, if you take anything out of the presentation for me today, gatekeep your content, please. make sure you've got it safely tucked away. So, managed detection and response, obviously there's a cost associated to it. We're already through the municipal budgeting cycles for the most part, right? So if you don't have something in the budget, likely not going to be added in for this particular year. So what can I do today, right? What does that look like? I've talked a lot about, the action side of things, things that we can do to harden or taking action if something happens within your environment. What can you do to plan ahead? Traditionally, that's been incident response retainers. And again, Michelle talked about this, IR obligations, right? Incident response obligations. So a lot of companies have leaned into retainers. Well, if I can't get the MDR, let's at least set ourselves up for a disaster on the other side of things. Now, what we've seen with traditional retainers is that there's been a large upfront cost, right? So you typically buying a bunch of hours and again, you may not be able to leverage those all in a year. Hopefully you don't, to be honest. But what happens is you lose that, right? So now this $40,000 or $50,000 incident response retainer that you have is being used up for tabletop exercises, and then you have to buy that again. There was delays in getting a hold of people, and then there was no planning assistance. So again, I feel like Arctic Wolf does things a little differently. We have a retainer program, $6,000 Canadian is where that one sits. It gets you a 1 hour response time. We're on a multitude of benches, most of the insurance provider benches in Canada. We have a portal where we produce documents not only from a runbook perspective during an incident, but also for you to actually prep yourself for an incident. And also something that we call the Cyber Resilience Assessment, where we actually allow you to go in and choose a framework like NIST 1.1, like NIST 2.0, CIS version 8, and actually kind of see how your environment lines up against those frameworks to either go get validation or know where those holes are, right? Getting back to Tim's comments about risk. So again, we approach things a little bit differently in this space. I have a couple of slides here on what that planner looks like. Again, pretty straightforward. You get in, you can identify your response team, who your external providers are in different areas, the network information for your sites, like all the key things that you would require if you were in an incident. But the nice part about this is it's stored offline. It's with us. It's air gapped. You also have the ability to send us additional documentation, 100 files, 100 meg each, of your BCDR plans, your network diagrams, whatever you think you needed to support that. The last one here that I want to talk about was those runbooks, right? So we have the incident response runbooks. We've got one for general activities. We've got one for ransomware. Go ahead. Okay, we've got one for ransomware and as well as business email compromise. And again, just as a bit of a visual, this is that cyber resilience assessment. It's a fantastic way to, again, going back, I'm gonna pick on Tim again, everything starts and ends with the business. So if the business identifies a problem, come in here, we can start tracking progress inside of the cyber resilience assessment, find our gaps, find our holes, know where we need to make that improvement. This now gives us a way to go take it back to the business and have that conversation. Like, we're still at risk. Are you okay with this risk? Again, doubling down on what Michelle said. If it's just you, if you're the one who owns it and you're not sharing this information and something happens, then that's sitting on your shoulders, right? Where in this model, share up, push up. And that's let somebody above you make that call, whether they need to not spend money in that particular area, right? So risk transference, even from your own perspective. And excuse me, like I said, just a bit of a visual on that, where we can see those requirements that are not being met. And again, a really nice report too. Great coloring, pretty straightforward, not convoluted, not some kind of giant block of text that we can output from this as well. So again, to have those easier conversations with the C-suite, with the board. And then that's it for me. Ronnie, back over to you.
Awesome, thanks, Josh. Yeah, a lot of content in there again. To close out, I know we're a little bit over time, but thank you all for attending. I just want to remind you that Charter, this is our lifeblood, and working with skill like this, people like this, and our own internal team, we're more than happy to step in to help you plan out and approach your security strategy, your cybersecurity requirements with a plan, with a strategy, with a purpose. And we can help you out with AI. We have a whole team that can help you out with governance and being able to work out those policy and governance requirements you have. Obviously, as we get to the end, a quick reminder, please reach out to us if you want to have a follow-up, and we will look at arranging a meeting with you and Arctic Wolf if that's something you'd like to do, and we'll make that arrange for Arctic Wolf to make that donation to the Canadian Cancer Society. But we would love the opportunity to follow up with you. I know we haven't ended up with a Q&A time, but you can feel free to send any questions to us. We'll send out to all the participants an update with all the presentation slides. You'll find our emails in there, but you can always contact us at info@charter.ca for anything you need as well. So thank you for your patience and your time. We really appreciate you giving us this time this morning, and looking forward to following up with you however that makes sense. Michelle, Tim, Josh, thank you for your time this morning. It's been very enlightening. Really appreciate all of your inputs, and have a great day.